Next off, Farraj Alsaeedi will be presenting Addressing Students as a Whole Person, Academic Librarians' Perceptions of the Makerspace in Academic Libraries, Phenomenological study, pardon me. So we're going to give Farraj a few seconds to pull up his presentation, and then we'll get started.
Both lines. Okay. So
yeah, real close.
I'll try to move this one to this. So I'll start like that. So hi everybody. My name is Farraj Alsaeedi. I'm so happy to be included with you in this conference, and I want to tell you guys, I'm so proud of you, and I'm so proud of being in the Simmons community where I can share these kind of results and hear these great presentations. So today I'm going to talk about my phenomenological study that I did in Boston, exploring academic librarian perceptions and lived experience with the Makerspace movement. And I kind of wanted to share with you part of my result, which I think it appeals to the DERAIL values and themes. So let's start. So to give you a little bit of a background of the development of academic library spaces, and as I stated in the slide, that it moves from three dominated models since the early 90s. It moved from the first model, which was information commons, where the focus was to support students to access a variety of information resources and to provide them with kind of tools to access these information resources. Then we moved to see another model, which is the learning commons, which was the idea about bringing other resources into the library as a place, for example, to bring the student, the writing center or other services to support the student learning, and the focus was student learning. And now we are experiencing a new movement, a new model of investing in academic library spaces, which is the Makerspace. Am I okay? Which is the Makerspace that celebrates creativity, innovation, and exploration. And to look at the literature, it's kind of, there were kind of dominated factors that led academic libraries to rethink about their spaces. The first one was the rapid development of technology, of information and communication technology, which in turn changed the user needs and expectation of what the library could do for them or what the library can support. So this kind of challenged the library to respond by using one of the most important assets in academia, which is the academic library spaces. And then one of the factors that also attributed and contributed to developing the spaces in academic library was the idea of creation of knowledge. And academic libraries were thinking about whether, okay, to support our case and to strengthen our value, we have to think about moving the academic libraries from a place of consumption of information to a place of creation. And again, as you might know, guys, it's kind of like this higher education competitive environment where a lot of universities and higher education institutions kind of going through reorganization of their departments and facilities, and we've been experiencing, funding cut, which in turn also kind of affect the academic library services and spaces. So the academic libraries were thinking about, okay, the spaces should be developed to kind of strengthen the library image. So, what is the Makerspace? Before we start on the result of my study, it's kind of like one of the, idea that has so many definitions, because it's kind of like a new current idea and a lot of people are experiencing it in different ways. But I believe this is one of the amazing definitions that stress on the ideas and the key themes that involved in a Makerspace program. And also it's kind of like, as it says, it's not defined, the Makerspace is not defined by a set of materials or space. It's more about the mindset of community, partnership, and collaboration and creation. So the goal of this phenomenological study was to explore academic librarians' lived experience with the Makerspace phenomenon in academic library, and to try and understand the influence of such a creative program from the academic librarian lens. So I went to the field with this research question, asking what are the academic library perceptions of the Makerspace phenomenon in academic libraries. So to give you a little bit of information about the background and the procedure of my research, so I employed a convenient and proposive sampling to select my participants. So people who are involved in Makerspace, in charge of Makerspace, were selected, and also people who I could get access to were also selected. And the data collection was, was done through semi-structured interviews with 5 academic librarians in Boston. 4 of them were assistant librarian and 1 center director. Also, the participants' experience in academic libraries ranged from 2 to 15 years in working in academic libraries. And it was really great also to have participants who comes from gender and different gender and ethnicity, and also the participant comes from 3 different colleges in Boston, and the participant again comes from 3 different types of makerspace. The first one was a kind of low-tech paperwork makerspace. The second one was more of high-tech 3D printing and digital design makerspace, and the third one was kind of like inclusive, that include the high-tech end of makerspace and the low-tech as well. So the data analysis, I employed a thematic analysis to generate themes and categories that has been addressed by the participants. And the analysis of the interview transcript resulted in 2 core themes related to the participants' experience with the Makerspace in their libraries. These themes are addressing the student as a whole person and the library as a space. And due to the goal of this presentation, I'm going to be focusing on the first theme, the student as a whole person. So the student as a whole person was one of the dominated themes, where the participants described their makerspace experience as a creative investment of library space that allow the libraries to target students' needs, to target their learning and academic, and also not just kind of stop in that area, but also go beyond their academic needs and try to target their life experience in a several ways. And the participants stressed that there was an important issue to consider the student as a whole person rather than just focusing on a student and his or her academic needs, especially in the current era. And so they were talking about kind of 4 areas where they felt that the Makerspace project appeared to address the student as a whole person. The first one was the student life experience. The Makerspace was a great opportunity to help the student talk about their life experience in creative ways, and also promoting different types of learning. The Makerspace was a great opportunity for that, and enriching student access to tools and material, and finally building a community of practice. And I'm going to be exploring some of the quotes and some of the ideas that has been addressed by the participants. So first, the student's life experience. The participant talked about the importance of addressing students' life experience, and also they talked about investing the differences in groups and gender and ethnicity in campuses. And they think that the Makerspace was a great opportunity to allow students to come together, create new things, and make or engage in an innovative experience in a very civic dialogue. And also they think, some of the participants think that addressing students' life experience and addressing also a social justice issue was kind of to support students' classroom learning, because some programs were talking about social justice, like social work program, and it was like kind of like responding to the demand and the need of students. And here is some examples of what the participants said. For example, as the first quote, participant one talks about students are in particular carving for opportunity and to do something that's creative and also to inject personal narratives into their scholarly work. And the second participant, as you see, she talked about how the Makerspace was an outlet that allowed students to be connected to their course and talk about personal stuff creatively. And the second category under the addressing student as a whole person, the participant talk about the Makerspace experience by addressing how it's important because it reflects and it allows for a different kind of learning types that help students to enrich their learning experience and as well as developing their creative skills, and which is kind of some of the students were not having a chance to do creative work in their program, so the library was a great opportunity for them to engage in these kind of activities. And also because it's kind of allow for hands-on learning experience, it allows for learning by failing and learning by blaming. And the participant felt that it's really empowering to have this kind of learning because the students were able to develop certain kind of skills. And here's some of the example of some of the participants were talking about the importance of promoting different types of learning through the Makerspace project. So I like the last one, which also talks about the importance of allowing the students, giving them the permission to enjoy and do and learn from the experience. And the participant was talking about, the GOAT example, which is really important to kind of, she was talking about unlocking the potential of students. And again, for example, talking about the learning by playing, one of the participants talk, it's kind of like help students to think about learning in a different way and helps their brain and their ability to learn. So going to the third category under student as a whole person, also the participant talked about other ways to address the student as a whole by saying that some of the participants might not have access to kind of tools, like, for example, let's say crafting tools and materials. And also other participants might not have, the ability to afford buying these materials or these resources. So it's kind of like it appears to allow them to get access to these skills and these resources, and also to address that they have other interests and the library can be able to support these interests. So for example, one of the librarians talked about how it was really, it's a radical idea where you go to the library and you have access to crafting material, and it was really interesting for them. And it wasn't just for the student's sake as well, it was also, it kind of like it allowed the academic library to strengthen their image by saying, okay, we have a collection of, for example, books and information resources, and again, we have other collections that support students' learning. And the other participant talked about the 3D printer, which I thought kind of like interesting because they have a 3D printer access to students. However, he stated that they do have a 3D printer in other departments. So the reason why they have the 3D printer in their library, it was like to give the students who kind of like being constrained or kind of like are not allowed to get access to these tools by, for example, their programs or departments. So it's kind of, it was a great idea to give other students from other departments the chance to experience this kind of tool. And also one of the great attributes that the participant talked about is that the Makerspace provide a kind of like a culture of building a community of practice. And this community of practice targets kind of the student skills creativity, because the student will be surrounded by the students and they can kind of, their fear or guilt kind of go away by engaging with other students and doing a creative activities. And also the participant talk about the community of practice in a way that the Makerspace allowed them to help the students get links and connection with experts in the field and also with their peers. So, and these are some of the quotes that talk about the community of practice. And again, as you see from the first quote, the participant was talking about how the community of practice was great also to help students take their fear away. And again, the second one talked about how he has been seeing a kind of a friendship going on in the Makerspace program. So to come to the kind of the lesson that I learned and conclusion that I got from my field work, the results showed me that academic library showed a great commitment to address a critical issue as well as addressing the students' learning and life experience. And the result I found was kind of like outstanding, because also I found the librarians have a kind of like a space where they can show their commitment to critical issue like social justice issues going on in the life of students. And also the result give us like a better understanding of the phenomenon that could help other academic libraries to develop makerspace that fit their patrons and users. And also what I found in my field work, that regardless of your resources, regardless of your budget, there are different wide variety of views. You can do a makerspace where you can get a great influence on students' learning and engagement with the library. And lastly, I found that kind of like the library space, when it's used to develop makerspace activity, appear to be a start point to rethink about the library role, the library services, and to advance the community learning and engagement with the library, as well as strengthening the library case. And in terms of the future research, because of I did kind of like interview just 5 participants, there is a kind of like a huge limitation of my research in terms of the amount of the sample that I selected. So I believe as a recommended future research, I might be thinking about doing a large scale research to explore the academic librarian perception about this movement, which can lead other academic libraries interested in doing this kind of creative program to have a great understanding and deep insight about the phenomenon. And I think also it's going to be important in future research to look at the experience of the user, the experience of students or faculty members who are benefiting from the Makerspace project, and to see how they evaluate their Makerspace involvement. And thank you so much for your attendance, and it's time for questions and answers.
All right, first question is in the room.
Hi, Farraj. Thanks for your presentation. Would you say that your participants were mostly positive about makerspaces? Did they express any ambivalence or talk about any drawbacks and how it affects their work, maybe?
Yeah, that's a good question, because as I said in in the beginning of my presentation, I kind of like giving a feedback of part of my research, and the rest of the research, yeah, they do talk about the challenges and how they could overcome these challenges, and where, for example, one of the participants talked about the business and the noise that kind of like happen in academic library settings and how they can overcome it. They talk about the budget, but in general, all of them, they were having a hugely positive attitude towards having a Makerspace project. And that when I talked about the key themes, because they felt there is a value in addressing the student as a whole, for example, and also they saw value for differentiating the library as a place from other spaces in academia. I don't know if I answered your question.
presentation. I was curious for your future research, will you focus primarily on academic libraries, or do you think you would include public and school libraries as well, as more and more schools and public libraries are becoming more makerspace themselves,
Okay.
including that in their education and curriculum?
Yeah, sure. I believe that my interest in academic librarianship, and when I did the literature review, for example, most of my literature comes of public and school libraries. And I believe where this idea comes from, it started in public and school library, then moved to academic libraries. And definitely it's going to be interesting to see the commonalities, the differences between, for example, librarians in different types of libraries. Because it was interesting, again, to find results that kind of like appeal to what the DERAIL conference is really about. I couldn't think about going to the field, thinking about the makerspace as a tool to embrace social justice, for example. So definitely, sure, I think for future research, it's kind of like interesting to look at the differences between the types of libraries and academic librarians' perceptions.
Thanks, Farraj. It's a great presentation. Why did you focus on makerspaces? What made you so interested in looking at this in particular?
The reason is kind of like, I didn't say that, maybe some of the students here knows me and my colleagues. I come from Kuwait, so this idea is kind of like very interesting, very new idea, where I thought exploring this idea might help me to think about the role of academic libraries back in Kuwait and also public libraries. Kuwait has a great potential in terms of money. So I thought, I thought that kind of like exploring this theme would allow me to see how it could be implemented in Kuwait. This one factor. And the second factor, because of my experience as an academic librarian, I was all the time thinking about the interaction, the user engagement. And I felt, okay, makerspace thing, kind of, it's a new thing, and it might be overcome, the challenge that I faced when interacting with students in academic libraries in Kuwait University. I believe this is kind of like the forces behind my idea to explore the makerspace.
All right, we have a question from Twitter. Is there collaboration or tension between any discipline-specific makerspaces, for example in engineering, that also exist on campus?
Yeah, for example, I had three different types of makerspaces, and kind of like one of them that has like the high-tech technology was kind of belongs to engineering, high-tech programs. And there was they talked about how other disciplines were kind of like using their spaces, and some faculty members, for example, sending students to explore the library resources. And one of the participants talked about, for example, supporting classroom assignments and activity where students come to use the 3D printer to design their projects, especially with architecture and this kind of stuff. And with other libraries as well, I found, like, for example, a program that has the focus of social justice in some colleges appear, for example, like the social work appear to kind of like jump into this idea and try to use it in classroom. So definitely there is a kind of collaboration, and I believe, as the librarian in my research said, that the responsibility appears to be on the shoulder of librarians to start this connection and build the connection between the curriculum and the resources they have.
Are there any organizations that would help potential librarians if they wanted to make their library more like a makerspace?
Yeah, good question. Sure. For example, I believe it's called, help me guys,
Then there's the museum, yeah, say it again, please. IMLS, one of the big institutions that give grants and support. And some of the participants talk about kind of other organizations that could help, especially with kind of like the hub creative spaces. And again, when I did the research, I kind of like found, the entrance or the kind of the specialty of the college appeared to influence the way how the colleges goes into the Makerspace program. For example, one of the colleges that did, as I said, craftivism and this kind of concept, and it does appear it comes from the background of the philosophy of the college. And with the other, for example, the high-tech Makerspace, they were able to provide it because of grants and because of the support of the college, and they felt it's a great tool because it's a technology school, so they found it's a great tool to have their students to be able to use it and think about it in the future. Again, and one of the things that was interesting in terms of like funding, one of the participants was really great in donating hair works and hair resources to the Makerspace project they have in their libraries. That was like a great also way of funding, because it's kind of like it shows, again, sometimes without that kind of huge budget, you could do lots of stuff. However, the librarians that I met, they talked about, okay, if you want to do a sustainable Makerspace project, you have to think about these kind of big things: planning, strategic planning, and the funding.
Do we have a final question? Okay, thank you so much.